Welcome to Reading Bear. Today, we've got a story where OP is told to stop overthinking and do exactly what the new boss says. I work in operations at a mid-sized company that makes and ships consumer gadgets for other brands. Not the glamorous stuff. We make the chargers, smart plugs, little trackers that attach to keys or bikes. My job is planning forecasts, purchase orders, production schedules, quality gates, shipping windows, and everything that turns ideas into boxes that arrive when a retailer expects them. It's not magic. It's checklists and boring spreadsheets that keep disasters from happening. I'm good at it because I'm careful. I'm the kind of person who writes down why we did something, who signed off, and what the fallback is if the plan breaks. People think that makes me slow. It does not. It makes me predictable. Clients like predictable. A new boss arrived, brought in to accelerate growth. He had the shiny background and the type of smile you only ever see in a recruiting brochure. First week, he explained how we were going to unlock working capital and stop over-engineering processes. He paced in front of a projector and used words like frictionless and hockey stick. Then he clicked to a slide titled, The Plan. His plan, in short, stop buying safety stock, consolidate purchase orders into a single big shot to get price breaks, skip incoming inspection for certain suppliers he trusted, freeze engineering changes for the season so we stop analysis paralysis, and reroute most shipments from our usual port to a cheaper one. That isn't a tourist trap. He also wanted to promise an early ship date to our biggest retailer to win prime placement. He said margins would improve and cash would flow. If you've ever staffed a line or run a warehouse, you already see the holes. If you haven't, think of it like trying to juggle knives while walking a tightrope and also turning off the safety net because it looks expensive. But I'm a planner, not the CEO. My job is to flag risks and document decisions. So I asked for time to run a quick what if. He waved it off and said I was anchored in slow patterns. I don't use many exact quotes because I don't pretend I remember every word. But I remember this one because I wrote it down. He told the room, and me directly, to follow his plan. He used that phrase, follow my plan. He said we were done with hand-wringing. He told me to stop sandbagging with doomsday scenarios. Then he sent a short email later that day that said, basically, implement the plan as presented. He CC'd his boss and the CFO. I replied, asking if he wanted any exceptions for live projects, already mid-build, or for any high-risk suppliers. He wrote back, no exceptions. I printed that email. I saved it as a PDF. I made a folder called Follow His Plan and put it in there with the slide deck. Not to set him up, to protect myself. There's a difference. I also started a status log and named it after the exact phrase he used. Every daily update referenced his instruction. Dry, simple, factual. I didn't editorialize. I didn't snark. I did what I was told. The big project that would test all this was a Bluetooth tracker we made for a fitness brand. The little coin-sized thing that attaches to keys and pairs to your phone. Cool product. Not complicated. But the pieces need to line up. The chip revision must match the firmware. The plastic needs the right dye. The battery vendor needs lead times. And the packaging has the exact legal text the retailer requires. Our contract with the retailer had a fill rate clause and a penalty if we missed the date. Not a hidden clause. It was in bold. Everyone had seen it. Under the old way, we would split purchase orders across 2 chip vendors, keep 2 weeks of safety stock on batteries because they're temperamental, run an incoming inspection on each lot of plastic casings to check fit and color variability, and build a pilot run before the retail build to catch dumb mistakes. We would stage release in waves, so if the first shipment hit a snag at the port, we didn't gamble the month. Overkill to some. To me, peace. Under the new plan, we combined the entire season's order into a single giant PO with the cheapest chip vendor to snag a discount. We dropped the battery safety stock to near zero. We skipped incoming inspection for the plastic because that vendor had ISO badges all over their website, which apparently was the same as quality. We froze engineering changes, including a minor firmware update engineering wanted to push because a corner case crash had been reported in a test rare but real. We changed ports. And we promised the retailer an early ship window to win a banner spot on their homepage. We didn't consult them on the feasibility of the earlier date. You can guess why. It didn't fit the story. I pressed the button. I mean that literally. We have a release workflow system, and I clicked the approvals and sent the consolidated orders. I updated the build plan to a single massive slot. I sent a calm note to the battery vendor that we'd be pulling just in time and needed them to hit their slot. I updated the team. As directed, we were following the plan with no exceptions. I asked the boss if he wanted me to create a backup plan in case the port had issues. He replied that defeatist contingency thinking is why we miss opportunities. I pasted that into the log. The first crack was small. The plastic casings arrived with a slight color variance. The hue was off just enough that you wouldn't notice unless you placed two batches next to each other, which is exactly what happens in a retail display. Our old incoming inspection would have caught it. Under the plan, we didn't inspect. We relied on the vendor's certificate. The production team flagged it midway through the first run when they saw trays that didn't match. I wrote it up and sent a photo. The boss replied that color science is subjective and to proceed. In retail, subjective is not a real word, but I was following his plan. We proceeded. The next crack, the battery vendor slipped by a couple days because one of their own suppliers had a strike. It happens. We usually buffer or buy a small buffer in advance. We had none. The line went idle. We paid people to stand around. I asked if we should sub in our secondary battery vendor for a partial run to keep the line warm. The plan had eliminated dual sourcing for price. He said no, and that starting a second vendor stream at this stage introduces chaos. I logged it. Crack number 3. The firmware issue the engineers had warned about showed up once units went through a longer burn-in. Not many, maybe 2 out of 100, but enough that quality wanted to pause and apply the small firmware patch they had ready. Under the plan, engineering changes were frozen for the season. I brought the request to the boss with a 1-page summary that showed the failure rate and the fix. He said the patch could wait and that we needed discipline to hold the line. I asked him to acknowledge the risk and got a 1-word reply. Noted. I pasted that too. Then the port change bit us. The cheaper port had exactly the kind of congestion our regular one had learned to avoid through hard years. Our first container was rolled. A storm didn't help. It's never just one thing. The ship we needed got diverted. Our freight forwarder called and used the tone that means you're going to spend money or lose face. We could book air for a portion or accept a high probability of missing the retailer's date. I escalated because our contract clearly spelled out liquidated damages if we missed the window. The boss told me to stay the course and claimed the forwarder was upselling fear. I sent the contract page with the clause again. He didn't reply until the forwarder called him directly. Then he authorized a partial air shipment that couldn't cover the shortfall anyway and cost the kind of money you feel like a bruise. Those were just the obvious cracks. The hairline ones multiplied. Packaging had a line of legal text the retailer required. Their updated template had gone out a while back, and our brand partner had sent it. But we were on a documentation freeze and using an older file. Our old process would have checked against the retailer's latest compliance list in incoming inspection. We didn't. Good thing the retailer noticed before it hit their shelf, right? Except they noticed after the first pallet hit their DC and ran a spot check. When a retailer spots the wrong legal text, they stop the line like you pulled a fire alarm. They quarantined everything from that lot and sent us a compliance chargeback. Not a suggestion. A bill. I kept it all in the log, not with attitude, just dates, actions, and the line from the plan that removed the guard we needed. I sent daily summaries to the distribution list the boss picked when he told me to increase transparency. Heads up, increased transparency without humility is basically arson. When the misses compounded, the retailer did what the contract said they could do. They applied the penalty for failing to hit the fill rate by the date. That was a fat number. They added the chargeback for non-compliant packaging. They reduced our co-op marketing credit because we failed to hit the early ship window we had pitched to win that homepage slot. These were not surprises. These were bullets on a slide we showed internally when folks pushed for early commitments in the past. We had a name for this cluster of risks. Own goal cascade. We added the unplanned air freight spend. We added the idle labor costs from the battery slip. We added the rework costs to replace packaging. We added the scrap from the units with firmware crashes that couldn't be patched easily without opening finished goods. We added overtime to catch up once the batteries finally arrived. You could feel the math getting heavy. Finance started to hover in the hallway. The CFO, who was not an excitable person, started asking for the log. I wasn't standing there with a gotcha. I was trying to keep the line moving, to allocate labor to where we were least blocked, to resequence packs so we made something instead of nothing, and to push the retailer's logistics team for the best case. But the numbers don't care how hard you try when your foundation is wrong. The boss didn't do well with pressure. He got short with people. He sent a message asking why we hadn't buffered this with basic blocking and tackling, which was the same as asking why we hadn't used the guardrails he ripped off. He started CCing more people. It always starts with more CCs. He tried to change the story. We were being overcautious. The retailer was being rigid. The port problem was a freak event. The battery delay was out of anyone's control. And engineering had overreacted about the firmware. In other words, everything except his plan was accountable. Eventually, leadership called the meeting you always know is coming. Not a normal one. All the senior people in a room with the projector off because no one wanted a slideshow. The CFO had a folder with printouts. The COO brought a notebook. Our brand partner joined by video. The boss took a seat at the far end, leaning back like he did when he wanted to project calm. I sat with my log and a couple of key documents, including the email that said, implement the plan as presented, and the status updates he'd been receiving every day. No one yelled. The CFO put numbers on the table. The penalty from the retailer for missing the window and fill rate. A chunk of money that made my stomach drop even though I knew it was coming. The chargeback for non-compliant packaging across the quarantined pallets. The reduced marketing credit we'd pledged to co-fund. The unplanned air freight. Idle labor and then overtime. Packaging, reprint, and rework. Scrap from the firmware crash units that were too painful to patch in box. Add it all up, less the small savings we got from consolidating orders and getting the chip discount. The total impact was $750,000, give or take a rounding error. No drama, just a number with a lot of zeros. The CFO didn't look at me. He looked at the boss and asked him to walk through where we deviated from the plan he had sent down. The boss said we hadn't executed with urgency and that we'd subverted the spirit by dragging our feet. He said operations layered on complexity instead of embracing the simplicity of his approach. Then he said something about legacy mindsets. The COO asked me if I had anything to add. I asked what they wanted, my opinion or the record. The CFO said, start with the record. So I did. I walked through the merged orders and the single-source chip vendor. The email where I asked if he wanted exceptions for live projects or high-risk suppliers. His reply, no exceptions. I showed the battery note. The dual-source suggestion declined. The port risk escalation. The clause in the retailer contract I sent him before the window. I showed the packaging compliance update from our brand partner and our decision to proceed with older packaging because we were on a change freeze under the plan. I showed the quality flag on the firmware issue and the one-pager engineering wrote with the patch ready. I showed the noted. I showed the part where he authorized a partial air shipment only after the forwarder called him when the container got rolled. I showed the daily log with all the recipients, including himself. I didn't add adjectives. I didn't say, I told you so. I let the dates talk. He tried to paint it as me being literal to the point of sabotage. He said a good operator would have filled the gaps with common sense. He said he expected leaders to own outcomes, not perform compliance theater. Good line. If you ignore the fact that outcomes were exactly what I highlighted before we locked ourselves into this. He said the plan assumed teams would apply adult judgment. I held up the email, implement the plan as presented, no exceptions. I showed where I asked for permission to build a small buffer, to run incoming inspection on the first lot, to dual source a portion, to run the firmware patch on the line with a contained carve-out, and where each one was declined. Not everything needs a quote to be specific. All I did was align to what he told us to do and documented it so there was no confusion. The brand partner spoke up over video and said their retailer had warned us about the consequences of missing the window and the exact packaging text they required, and that our company usually hit these things. Usually did a lot of work in that sentence. They were trying to be diplomatic. The CFO asked the boss to step outside for a minute. He did. I sat there and stared at the table and tried to slow my breathing. The CFO asked me why I followed the plan if I thought it would break this way. Fair question. I told him that I raised my concerns, asked for exceptions, and got told explicitly to follow it. I told him I don't freelance with other people's money. If a senior leader wants to take a big swing and ask me to build a different kind of scaffold, I'll do it, but I won't secretly nail on extra beams and then pretend the blueprint was theirs. That might feel good in the moment, but it destroys accountability. I said I wasn't happy with the outcome, but that it was honest. If they wanted me to go rogue in the future, they should say so, and accept what comes with that too. He nodded. The COO asked me what we'd do differently, and I gave the boring list. Keep dual sourcing for critical parts, Keep a small battery buffer. Never skip incoming inspection on cosmetic components. Never freeze a safety patch when we have evidence of field failure. Stage shipments in waves. And never promise a date to a retailer we can't defend with a realistic schedule. None of it was revolutionary. That's the point. Most of operations is avoiding heroics. They brought the boss back in. The meeting ended without a dramatic statement. No firing on the spot, no slamming doors. That's not how it works in real life. People go off and talk in other rooms. HR gets involved. Lawyers ask for exact wording in emails. Time passes. In the meantime, we still had to build the rest of the trackers and dig out of the hole. My team did what good teams do. They shook off the embarrassment and fixed what could still be fixed. We reprinted packaging, patched firmware for future runs, and built a recovery schedule. The retailer accepted the plan because they don't want to be empty any more than we do. They still collected the penalty. They still took the charge back. You don't get those back because you're sorry. Word gets around in a company, though. People pay attention to who eats the blame. Some folks like to watch it happen. I just kept updating the log and doing my job. A few days later, I was asked to join a lessons learned session led by internal audit. If you've never had audit in your meeting, it's like having a very quiet mirror held up to your process. They asked me to walk them through each point where a control was bypassed or removed. What compensating control we used. Answer, none, because that was the directive. And who approved the change? Answer, the boss, in writing. They asked calm questions. They didn't crack jokes. They asked to see my folder. I gave it to them. I didn't give them my opinions. I gave them dates and attachments. Audit is not a place for vibes. Another week passed. The boss's calendar started looking thin. Meetings he usually ran got reassigned. One-on-ones disappeared. A direct report of his ran the next staff meeting and didn't say why. Then HR sent an email that he was pursuing other opportunities. That's corporate for we don't want a lawsuit. People shared the email around like they always do and replied with safe phrases. I didn't celebrate. I put the printout of his directive in a drawer and got back to work. I wish the story ended with me getting a big raise, a parking spot, a trophy shaped like a pallet jack, and the corner office. Real life is quieter. I got a bonus adjustment a while after, tied to the recovery, and probably tied to the fact that leadership needed to keep the people who kept the wheels on. I got looped in earlier on commitments to retailers. I got asked to review contract language around penalties. The engineers got an easier path for safety patches during freeze windows. We wrote down a policy that no one can skip incoming inspection on cosmetics without sign-off from quality, ops, and legal. We added a rule that if someone wants to consolidate POs for price breaks, the plan must show how we're going to manage risk if a vendor slips. We built a small oh-no inventory of critical components. It was boring, and it helped. I also learned something about myself. I used to think the noble thing was to quietly save a leader from their own plan by doing what I knew was right, even if they said otherwise. But that teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches them that their instincts work and that the cautious people worry too much. It sets up the next, bigger failure when the cautious person isn't there. I'm not interested in playing the hero in secret. I'm interested in preventing expensive lessons and, if we must pay tuition, making sure we learn what we paid for. Some folks on our floor started calling me as directed because of how I titled the log. It wasn't an insult. It was a kind of respect. I followed the instruction exactly, documented the result, and let the consequences land where they belonged. It wasn't spite. It was accountability. If you want me to take creative risks, I'll do it and own them. If you want me to follow the plan to the letter, I will do exactly that and record how it goes. Either way, we'll have receipts. The brand partner stuck with us. They told us they appreciated how, once the problem was clear, we moved cleanly. The retailer was colder for a while. Fair. We earned that. The next season, we promised later and sold earlier when we were ready. Not because a deck said we needed a banner slot. We shipped on time and passed their compliance checks. No one wrote a memo about it. That's how you know it was done right. There's a section in our internal wiki now that spells out the own goal cascade with simple bullets. I didn't write it alone. Quality, engineering, logistics, and customer service contributed. Finance added the line that hit people hardest. The all-in cost of that season's lesson. It's there for new managers to see when they get excited about discounts and PowerPoint savings. It's a reminder that invoices from the real world are more expensive than anything you think you're saving on a slide. We estimated the air freight at a number that made finance sigh out loud. We counted idle time, then the rush overtime to catch up. We counted reprints, repacks, and the time to pull and reapply labels. We counted scrap that couldn't be economically reworked. We counted the retailer's penalty and the chargeback. We counted the reduced marketing credit and the lost opportunity on the homepage. We netted against the savings from the chip discount and the port fees we would have paid if things had gone normally. The net was ugly. The wiki doesn't use bold. It doesn't need it. I still have the folder in my drawer, not because I want to wave it at anyone, because I want to remember how easy it is to talk yourself into shortcuts that look smart until you try to ship 1,000,000 small pieces of plastic and silicon into a world that doesn't care about your pitch. I open it sometimes when a new shiny plan arrives with big arrows and a promise to simplify. I'm not against simple. I'm against pretending simple means ignoring the parts where things break. The funny thing is, the boss wasn't wrong about everything. We did find some bloated steps that we later trimmed. We did renegotiate a couple of supplier terms for better payment schedules. We did rebuild our dashboard so leadership could see real constraints earlier and stop asking for miracle dates. We even moved a small portion of volume to a secondary port that proved reliable after some upgrades. But we did each of those things after testing and with proper checks, not by tearing down the guardrails and bragging about how fast we could drive. People asked me later if I felt bad. The number 750,000 wasn't a theoretical punishment. It meant canceled projects in other departments and tighter belts for a while. I did feel bad. I still do. But I also know what would have happened if I'd quietly disobeyed and patched the plan in the shadows. We might have lucked into a smaller loss, or even made it. The boss would have taken the win, used it to push harder next time, and eventually the bill would come due when the person on the floor that day didn't have the knowledge or the nerve to cheat the plan for the better. The company would have learned the wrong lesson. Sometimes the only way to teach the right lesson is to let the wrong plan show you why it's wrong, while you make sure everyone can see exactly how and when it failed. There was one little moment at the end that I guess counts as personal closure. I was in the break room getting coffee when the CFO came in. We're not close. We don't chat. He poured his coffee, looked at me, and said he was glad the documentation was as clean as it was. He said it made a hard situation straightforward. Then he said something I hadn't thought about. He said, "I don't like paying tuition, but when we do, I want the transcript." I laughed, because that's as close to a compliment as you get in finance. We stood there for a second, two tired people with lukewarm coffee, then went back to our desks. Now, whenever someone says, "Just follow my plan," I nod and ask them to put it in writing, not as a trap, as a structure. If you want ownership, you get it, with a signature and a date. I'll run the play exactly how you draw it, and if it works, I'll be the first to say you were right. If it doesn't, we'll have the record and we'll fix it. That's the job. It isn't glamorous, and it doesn't fit in a motivational poster. It's checklists, spreadsheets, and people showing up to do the right thing, even when the plan is wrong. It's also, sometimes, malicious compliance in the purest sense. Follow the order, let the consequences teach, and make the company smarter for the next person who thinks they can talk reality. If you're curious about the exact number, Finance closed the books on that season with a neat summary that made my stomach twist the first time I read it. The net impact tracked to a simple figure that everyone could remember and no one wanted to say out loud at first. 750,000. Not a rounding error. Not an abstract hit. A number that lived in our planning meetings for a long time as the answer to, what happens if we skip the steps? The good person doesn't always get a medal. Sometimes the win is that next season, when a bright-eyed manager suggests consolidating all orders again to unlock cash, someone says, let's grab the wiki, and they read the section that documents why that's a bad idea without the right protections. They see the word penalty without a marketing gloss. They ask quality to weigh in early. They include engineering in the freeze planning, but carve out fixes for safety issues. They split shipments. They stage builds. They do the boring things. They ship on time. No one writes an email about it. No one gets a banner on the homepage for basic competence. That's okay. That's what I wanted. I still sign my updates the same way when a leader has given a direct instruction and I'm following it to the letter. Per your directive, here is today's status. It's not passive-aggressive. It's clear. People can ignore warnings and they can downplay risk, but they can't say no one told them or that we freelanced the plan. Accountability can feel like malicious compliance when you're the person who gave the order. From where I sit, it's just another word for telling the truth. And if anyone is wondering, the next time a plan came down that cut out inspections and buffers and pushed us to promise dates the schedule couldn't support, I asked the same questions. This time, the answers were different. We ran a pilot. We staged the shipments. We kept a small buffer. We didn't need a penalty. We didn't pay for air. We didn't need overtime to dig out of a hole we dug ourselves. The CFO still didn't smile, but the quality manager bought the team donuts, which is about as flashy as it gets in operations. No slides. No hockey stick, just numbers that didn't make anyone's lunch churn. If you've read this far, maybe you work in a place where plans arrive from on high, and the people who have to make them real are expected to be flexible. Flexibility is a nice word. It does not replace physics. When a plan ignores real constraints and the person in charge insists you follow it exactly, do them and yourself a favor. Ask for it in writing. Make a clear log. Follow it exactly. Then let the outcome do the talking. You won't always get thanked for it, but the company will learn something real, even if the lesson is expensive. We did. We learned exactly how much it costs to follow a plan that sounded good in a room where nothing gets built. It cost $750,000. That's a number I don't need to print again to remember. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow.